You'll just call it to order, then I'll swear him in first.
I don't do that. I do it. Okay, at this time, we'll call the meeting to order.
If I could have Mr. Abbott, Mr. Bratton, Mr. Johnson, please take center stage here to be officially sworn in.
Sounds like a law firm you don't want to go to, doesn't it? You look with me tonight.
Mr. Abbott, Mr. Bratton, Mr. Johnson, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will faithfully and impartially perform your duties as a member of the Board of Education of the Bloom Carroll Local School District, and will do so to the best of your ability in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office and until your successor is elected and qualified? If so, please respond by saying I do.
I do.
Congratulations. Have three. Guys, get your signature right here.
Just remember, the big checks only roll in twice.
We won't hold our breath.
Roll call.
Mr. Abbott,
Present.
Mr. Bratton,
Present.
Mr. Johnson,
Present.
Mr. Mellis,
Present.
Mrs. Parker.
Present.
And the pledge. You'll join us.
Emily, you want to lead us? Start us off.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we're able to conduct the organizational meeting, Fairfield County still requires a budget hearing prior to the organizational meeting. Most counties have waived this requirement. Unfortunately, Fairfield County is not one of them. So what I normally try to do and convey as part of the budget hearing is really kind of a two-part process. As you look at page 2 in your packet, it's page 2 on the hard copy as well as the electronic copy, you will see what Mr. Hahn and I have laid out as an operating budget timetable. So truly what the tax budget will serve as is a baseline for our fiscal 19. If you think about that for a second, the budget hearing is on the budget for July 1st of 18 through June 30th of 19's financial activity. So we're truly 6 months prior to the budget even commencing. So this will serve as a baseline as we go through our planning sessions, as we meet with each building and have department requests, as we start to look at our staffing for next year. We look at our enrollment. The board will have opportunities to approve the wish list for our capital budget, as well as approve any additional staffing recommendations brought to you by Mr. Hahn and myself. So again, that will affect our baseline for planning. Again, I laid out the timetable from January, our planning sessions February through May. June, we will finalize this year's appropriations. So again, a lot can change between now and by the time we get to fiscal 19, including current year financial activities, which can have a substantial impact on next year's budget. So again, just the timing of this, it really should serve as a baseline and nothing final in terms of a documented budget. In August, we will start to finalize building budgets. We'll look at our enrollment. We will revise our estimated revenues. And in September, we will bring you 9 months worth of planning, the ability to approve an official budget, the official appropriation measure. So this is truly a starting point and not an ending point. The second page is really, it's page 3 on the electronic copy, is a cursory look at where we kind of stand right now if everything kind of holds true to what the forecast sets forth. The prescribed format, if you will, of the county is the pages after this. It's very convoluted form, so I've tried to just condense it down to the summary on page 3. Column C is what we are looking at in the current year. Again, these can change, which will subsequently change column D. Column D gives you kind of where we see ourselves right now, both from a revenue perspective and an expense perspective, which is what we're really approving tonight, lines 12 through 18 on the estimated expenses. Again, this is a look at our expenses on an object standpoint. If we remember from the orientation, we look at them both from an object and a departmental or function standpoint. You can see some of this changes there. Our salaries and wages are pretty set with the negotiated raises plus the step increases. Purchase services, text and curriculum, employee benefits should be pretty close. We've talked about reducing our capital budget. That is included currently in our next year's planning. And again, as it serves as a baseline, if we're going to increase or exceed that, I think it at least gives the board and the administration the ability to see what kind of impact that'll have on our bottom line. So again, that's the purpose that we'd like for this to serve tonight. Line 20 is always key. Instead of getting caught up on the cash balance, it's all about line 20. It's as simple as how do our revenues compare to our expenditures. We're very close right now in terms of surplus, operating surplus or a budget deficit in terms of deficit spending. So certainly the decisions as we go through the next 5-6 months can have a pretty significant impact. Again, I won't go too much further into this. Just kind of give you the background on the tax budget, more of a Fairfield County requirement, and then we'll go through the next 5-6 months of planning. The 5-year forecast serves as the official financial document of the school district as opposed to the tax budget. So, any questions on the tax budget and the ability to approve it and submit it to the county auditor?
Travis, does this have anything to do with the email we got today at 2 o'clock, by the way?
It does not.
Okay.
The district itself is going through a financial audit, and I'll go through that on my section, but you will start to receive some correspondence. Instead of sending it to me and having me send it, their official policy is to send it to the entire governing body at once.
So we need a motion to approve the budget for 2019. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Roll call.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Thank you.
And now we begin the organizational meeting. Number 6, nomination and election of president and vice president. Call for nominations for president.
Make the nomination that Mr. Millis be the president.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Yes, I am the oldest board member. Tell Mayor. Okay, and roll call then?
This is simply to close the nominations, and then I'll call a voice vote for your vote for president. So to close the nominations, Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Now if you would convey your vote for president as I call your name, please. Mr. Abbott?
How would you like us to convey? Yes or
You will just, the candidate that you would like to see as president?
no?
Yes. Mr. Bratton?
Millis.
Mr. Johnson?
Millis.
Ms. Parker?
No.
And Mr. Mellis?
Should I abstain? I'll abstain. And we have nominations for vice president. I'd like to nominate Mr. Abbott.
I'll second.
That was close.
That was close. I'll second.
Okay.
We're on.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Okay. To close nominations, Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Now your roll call for candidate for vice president. Please indicate the candidate you would like to vote for as vice president. Mr. Millis,
Abbott.
Mr. Bratton,
Abbott.
Mr. Johnson,
Abbott.
Mrs. Parker,
Abbott.
and Mr. Abbott.
Abstain.
Thank you. And no, there's no extra money involved. Well, if you've never been to a board meeting, it's like that. Okay. Establishment of regular board meetings and to be held at 6 p.m. on the following dates, and if you go through those dates.
Let's
See if there's
talk
any
about
problem.
those a little bit. Just noticed that the March meeting and September meetings have traditionally been held at the Lytopolis Intermediate School. And I do know that one board member contacted me, Mr. Bratton will be out of town July 9th, which we can either move it or we can proceed if we'll have a quorum, which is 3. That happens from time to time. It's not the end of the world. We can still conduct business. You know, even if it's 3 or 4 of us.
I went to Alaska last year and found it very nice. About that same time period.
And then also, there was some discussion, I think this past year in October, we went the week after fair, which would have been the 3rd Monday in October, and I think there's a desire to possibly do that again. But please, speak up, have discussion on any of these dates. Typically, it's the 2nd Tuesday of the month here in the middle school. Any issues or any conflicts with any of these dates?
Go ahead.
I believe on the May, I'll actually be out of the country. The May 14th one, I'll get back with you in regards to it though.
I will also be out of town at July.
So
So we need to move it.
So we need to move it.
Just in case. Let's,
So,
see here.
so we make it July 16th then, a week later?
Yeah, I think that's okay, that probably
Does
helps.
that work for you, Matt?
Yes.
Anybody else out in May?
August 6th is due to the conflict with teacher workday.
Yeah, this past year, we held it on the workday, and that was kind of a nightmare. And sometimes with hiring purposes, we ended up actually hiring people after they had already done their new teacher orientation on the previous Friday. So if we do that on August 6th, that actually helps us out if we have any last minute hiring before school starts. And then October, are we saying the 15th on October?
Yeah.
That's better.
Yeah.
You're not showing any more stuff in general. You're not your thing.
I will.
We're not me. It's not your, well, I mean, I thought somebody's might, you know. Which means you'll be doing some work also. We know that good. If there's no other discussion, then, motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion, any discussion then? Roll call.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Millis.
Yes. And the establishment of planning sessions and additional monthly board of education meetings will be held at 6 p.m. the following dates.
Now, these are typically, I can see us, if things continue to go well the next couple of weeks, I can see us be very busy between February, March, April, and even May, depending on the outcome of a potential levy. I think it would be good to maintain these dates. However, some of them could be canceled, and they have been in the past. But I could see us definitely needing the February, March, and April planning sessions as we go through that pre-levy process. And then if we pass a levy, we will immediately start working with OFCC on a design phase and getting everything together to, that sometimes takes up to a year to design a building and work with them on construction pre-planning. So there may be months that we cancel, and there may be months that we need to hold them. I'd feel better if we left them on the calendar and then cancel, a week ahead of time or at the board meeting before that if we didn't have anything to discuss.
It has to be a week at a time by.
Well,
Is it a week even?
no, it's actually by law, it's 24 hours.
24 hours.
Yeah, so,
Has to be in the paper or.
yeah, We always do a 48-hour notice because board members have to be notified 48 hours, and we just treat the media and the public the same way. But technically, it's 24 hours for them, 48 for board members. So, is any issues with the planning session? I didn't schedule one. We didn't schedule one for January because you're here tonight. You got a regular meeting we're doing. You got another meeting on the 22nd. That week, we'll get some clarification on some things, and I thought February at the earliest would be good.
Okay, any discussion then? Okay, motion then? Is there a second? Second by Mr. Abbott. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
And Mr. Mellis?
Yes. Number 9, request a representative from each of the following categories to be available for a presentation at the following regular board meetings.
The only thing that I've kind of redone that when I first started, I took a look at our public participation, kind of redid some things a little bit. I am going to make a change. We still have January, February, March, April, May to get through this year. June is typically an athletics update, but Mr. Little will be out of town in June, so we bumped that to July. That'll kind of give a summary for the year. And then we'll kind of start over in August with what we've done this year, with the curriculum, then transportation, primary school, nurses, and I'm bumping the performing arts. They requested to go in December. That's a better time for them. And Mr. Little had actually requested to go in June. So that's kind of why we have some of the changes there.
So, real quick, Sean,
Yeah.
do school nurses typically come twice? I see them listed on the,
Well,
with food services as well.
yeah, they are, so I do it by school year. So the 17-18
Oh, okay.
school year, the school nurses are going in May for the 17-18 school year. And then for the 18-19 school year, they're gonna go in November.
Okay.
Made that switch with
Yeah,
that.
just saw them.
No vote on that.
No. 10, board member liaison appointments for 2018. And if we could go over this again, just to make
Yeah.
sure we're all on the same page with this. There's been some changes.
I've had communicated with me the desire to maybe look at the liaison appointments or the committees established and revisit those. Maybe add one or eliminate some that the board may feel that they have employed personnel to handle those responsibilities. So, one area that they felt that we needed to address would be the first one with facility management and transportation. To take the transportation piece off, just focus on the facilities. I think transportation was added somewhere in the past. And I don't know if we want to maybe go over all the potential committees first before we look at assigning, Mark. Is that okay with you?
That's okay.
Okay. And then the keeping the personnel and labor management, I've had expressed that the media, communications, and community relations, that the board, and I agree that they have hired me to be a spokesperson and represent the district with the media. The administration and teachers know that before they can comment, they need to refer things back to the superintendent, and if there's a major issue. So I'm kind of that spokesman. If the board would need to discuss something about the superintendent with the media, the board president would typically do that. So we had talked about eliminating that particular liaison appointment altogether. So keeping the OSBA representative, keeping the policy committee, keeping the safety, health, and wellness committee, and then eliminating the curriculum instruction and co-curricular and replacing it with a finance, insurance, and budget committee. We have a curriculum director that is certainly capable and knowledgeable. We have teachers that she works with to help select curriculum. Ultimately, that recommendation comes from me at the end after they do their job, but I feel that the teachers and the curriculum director are more than capable of identifying programs that are proven and research-based to be effective. And I would still provide updates we would have curriculum adoptions. We have most of our core subject areas out of the way. In fact, Jody and I were talking about this today. Jody, I'm gonna put you on the spot, but this coming school year or summer, we will be looking at non-core or more like your related arts, your arts and music and phys ed, your health. Actually, not even foreign language. We adopted that separately. So we'll have some specials or related arts adoption, and then the following year, I don't think we will have one because we just have gone through the last several years. We just updated our math curriculum, our science curriculum, our social studies curriculum. Everything's been updated over the last 4 years. Jody's worked also with Travis on budgeting for that. But that's on a rotation every 5 years. It kind of cycles through where we do it by subject area. So we just adopted standards-based, educational programs, curriculum, resources for our teachers. And Jody works closely with the staff in each building on that. So that was kind of the reason for the possible shift, if that's what you guys want to do. Yeah.
Obviously, Jody, I know it's kind of direct towards Jody.
Yeah.
So, are you at every meeting? And I mean, every meeting I've been here, you've been here. So, as far as me, this is good with you. I mean, it's something.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's fine. Because
A lot of districts actually require their principals to be in meetings in case you do have questions. That hasn't been a past practice in this district. I'm not saying I need them at every meeting, but I have requested that they, whether it's curriculum, and Jody shows up a lot, one, because she's interested, and two, she has a stipend to be our communications director as well. And she does a lot of the social media and website work that we see. So she's here to also stay informed and gather information, so that's why you see her a lot. But she'll be available to give us curriculum updates when we are adopting curriculum as well. Mark is Mark is a former teacher, so he has maybe some more expertise and background in that and has been through that plenty of times in his life. But typically most board members are not, licensed teachers or educators. So I think that, it's our job to rely on our teachers and rely on our curriculum director to make decisions and ultimately hold them accountable for what we're doing.
But I still went in myself and asked Jody to give me a tutorial.
Yeah.
I think it was supposed to be an hour. I think we stretched it to about, I stretched it to about 2.
Yeah.
I kept asking questions about,
So
the testing I had to put up with is certainly different than today. So.
Yeah, so we would have 6. We would have 6 liaison appointments or committees still, but eliminate the
C&G.
Yeah, C&G.
I would make one comment just on C. I think we talked about this too. I don't think we need a specific committee for community relations. I mean, I believe, and I think we talked about that some before, that that's the job of all of us, is community relations. I don't think you need 2 people assigned only purely for that fact, right? I think we all do that. So one might look at that and say, well, why would you eliminate community relations? To me, that's the job.
That's a great point. You guys are probably already finding out that you're available to the community. You have that dialogue with the community.
Right.
So
when they know we're actually board members,
yes. So I guess if there's not any huge objection to that, if we go back up to the top and start with facilities management, I'll let you guys either volunteer or make your recommendations and acceptance.
So what we had down earlier for A was Joe and myself for facility management. That's still okay?
Yep.
Joe and Mark.
Okay, personnel and labor.
Mark is currently on that, right?
Currently on that. Matt, is it right?
Yes.
Makes sense with finance.
It's Mark and Matt. And then OSBA rep.
Stacy and Rod.
And anyone that wants to be the main. Stacy, did you want to be the backup? Or?
Yeah, I'll be back. Just
Okay.
Rod's
Rod, are you okay
schedule
with
is
that?
more.
Yes, I agree with that.
Stacy.
Is policy.
Policy, Mark has been serving on that. He's familiar with that process. And then,
Rod's
Rod.
primary policy.
yeah, Rob will be first representative on the. I'm I'm sorry.
OSBA.
Oh, I'm talking OSBA.
Oh.
Rod and then Stacy on OSBA.
Rod and then-
Policy, Mark, and they both attend those, policy committee meetings. Rod has some flexibility with his work schedule during the day, so Mark and Rod. And then Stacy has served on our safety, health, and wellness, committee. They meet twice a year.
And she's a nurse.
Yeah, she has a health background.
No.
We can have a backup if you guys want. I mean, you don't have to. Is there anybody else that's interested?
I mean, I'll be back up.
Yeah.
If I need it, I don't know how much help.
Yeah, those meetings are typically held December, April, or May, and we hold them usually around 3 o'clock, so school is out. So Joe, Stacy and Joe. And then, finance, insurance and budget. Mr. Bratton has some background and expressed interest in that.
Yep.
And, any of you?
I can be a second one.
Okay, Rob? So
And
finance.
if you can't, I'll be a third.
Matt,
I
Rob?
mean,
Any motion?
okay, any question? Anybody having cold feet already about the committee assignment? Okay, roll call then.
I hear the motion.
Excuse me, how about a motion?
I'll make a
I'll
motion.
do.
I'll make a motion to approve, liaison members as appointed.
Thank you. Second. Now how about a roll call?
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
and Mr. Millis.
Yes. Okay, do I read all of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, for 11, in order to promote the efficient operation of the school, consider approving the following standing authorizations. A, authorization for the treasurer to request advances from the county auditor when funds are available and payable to the district. B, authorization for the treasurer to invest interim funds in accordance with state law. C, authorization for the treasurer to borrow funds within the confines of established accounting practices and statute for the internal funds or outside institutions if it is necessary to do so. D, authorization for the treasurer to pay all bills when due, provided funds are available upon the receipt of services or materials as specified, and make regular monthly financial reports to the Board of Education. And E, authorization for the treasurer to make appropriate modifications within a particular fund and to add new appropriations as necessary to conduct the financial business of the school district. And give the superintendent authorization to do the following to the best of the school with expenses reimbursed as provided by board policy during 2018. These authorizations provided shall remain in effect until withdrawn by formal action of this board. A, make decisions regarding the attendance of all other staff members at such state and local meetings as he deems necessary. B, act as purchasing agent for the board and school district and dispose of surplus school property by sale according to the provisions of law. C, make application for beneficial state and federal grants. D, to authorize the superintendent on behalf of the board to accept resignations which have been submitted by employees during times when the board is not in session, subject to the ratification of the board, provided, however, that the ratification by this board, such resignation shall be deemed effective as of the date and time the superintendent's acceptance. And E, authorize the superintendent during periods when the board is not in session to hire personnel for replacement on behalf of the board and to acknowledge acceptance of such offers on behalf of the board, subject to the subsequent vote of ratification by this board, provided, however, that the ratification by this board, the appointment shall be deemed effective as the stated date and time of the employee's acceptance of the superintendent's office. That was a really long sentence. But you get a language arts teacher in there, see if I was a run-on sentence. 1, nothing shall require the Board of Education to employ or continue to employ an individual who has not provided a criminal records check satisfactory to the board or who has not satisfied any other prerequisite to employment created by law or board policy. Are there any questions? And no, I don't really want to read it again. Anybody have any questions? The hiring stuff is usually like, you know, we have a board meeting in August and that they do hirings and then, you know, we haven't done a meeting until September. That would be the biggest, the explanation for that one.
These are standard revised code, authorizations, so just basically so we can conduct business every day.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Second. Okay, roll call please.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Millis.
Yes. 12, approve the following as legal counsel for 2018 in addition to the county prosecuting attorney and pay for legal services from district funds. Ricker Neckler for general counsel and Dinsmore, and is it Scholl or Scholl? Scholl for bond and construction. So it's formerly Beck Schuler.
I'll make the motion to approve legal counsel.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call then.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes. This concludes our organizational meeting. One, we have approval of agenda. Is there any agenda item that needs to be changed? We have an addendum. Is there anything else that they want to see that they want change?
We have an addendum at, 6, C, number 6, we'll have an addendum there. And that's it. Travis, you have
Now, do we need to have 3 votes for the approval of minutes? Since these folks, only 2 of us were here.
You only
Well,
need,
I checked on that. They can actually,
They can
you guys
actually-
can conduct the business and approve the minutes from the previous.
Okay, I was wondering about that before we got it. Okay, we,
Approval of agenda.
approval of agenda, could we have a, could I have a motion? Who wants to be the?
I'll
Ron, okay. Second, Stacy? Mrs. Parker. Is there any discussion? Okay, roll call please.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes. To approve minutes from December 11, 2017 meeting. I did not see anything that grabbed me that was wrong, so.
Been through two, I think everything looked good. Travis, you good with everything?
Yep.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes from December 11th? I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay. Roll call, please. Discussion.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Roll call.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
And number 3, public participation. Do we have anyone?
No, we do not.
That's still the same old sign? They've had the same sign since.
Before I
started.
started, I know.
Complaints from time to time. That might be the really amazing thing tonight is, me as board president, 25 years ago, I'm sure we had some people in the community want to go, really? No, this is a board president, really? Oh.
Again, at our January 22nd meeting, we'll have staff participation from technology and student services.
And number 4, then treasurer's report.
Item A, asking for board approval to set the new mileage reimbursement rate at 54.5 cents per mile. These are new IRS guidelines, and this would just authorize us to reimburse at the IRS rate.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Used to actually get that from time to time, my part. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Item B, it's a requirement in our policy during the organizational meeting that we establish a board service fund within the general fund. And this will be used for expenses incurred by members of the Board of Education and performance of their official duties. 99% of the time, it's going to be seminar expenses. There might be some reimbursement at some point and or mileage. This is the amount we've appropriated to the account really for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been an adequate and a sufficient amount. So I would recommend $2,500 into the board service fund. It's actually within the general fund, but that will be used for, again, for expenses incurred by the board.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Usually it's OSBA things that we're attending.
Mhm.
Or DSC too would be something. Roll call, please.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
And Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Item C, we're very thankful to be able to recognize the following donation to Bloom Care Local School District. David Brenneman donated in the amount of $915 for the purpose of eliminating some of our lunch charge balances within our food service department. So we'll work with Mrs. Inyart, the food service director, to help those individuals in need in terms of making sure that their balances are eliminated by this generous donation.
Is this the same gentleman that has the business here in town?
I don't know, he's the spouse of one of our teachers. I'm not sure of his business background.
Any questions? We do get these from time to time. Okay, is there a motion to approve? Second. Thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
And finally, asking for approval to authorize the treasurer to obtain bids for the high school roof replacement. We've talked about this in several different planning sessions. The architect is currently working on providing us specific specifications for replacement of the high school roof portion above the offices in the cafeteria. Once we have approval for bid, we will schedule the official bid opening, which must be conducted in a public forum. At that point, we will recommend a lowest responsible bidder based upon our architect's recommendation, and it must be brought back to the board again for approval before any project can start. And certainly, we can reject any and all bids if we feel like it's outside of the estimates and they are not, or they are not responsible.
I'll make the motion to.
Okay, I'll second that one. Any discussion? I think you gentlemen have been in enough board meetings, talking about the section in the high school down from the office.
Yes.
That section.
Actually, what we're looking at is that first floor section above the cafeteria, music room, and above the office, and those classrooms on the first floor. The architect, we had talked with him, and he is going to, no additional cost, also entertain bids possibly for the second floor, just to see how much extra that would cost as well, and what options we have, depending on the types of replacement or warranty we go with. But the first floor section, we're looking at, the types of products and roof replacement that would give us a 20-year warranty, because in our facility plan, that is a portion of the building that we would maintain for district office use, and maintain the gym and the instrumental music room for vocal music, and then the cafeteria for potential board meeting space. And then those 4 classrooms would potentially be district office, treasurer, student services, everybody that's in the modulars right now in technology. So again, that's in the phase 2 of our master plan, not in phase 1. So, 20 years, I think is, we just have to determine if it comes in, and if it's a decision that the board wants to proceed with after we get some bids.
The question I have in regards to that, in some of these cases, do we go to the lowest cost? What they offer, because I think when you look at some warranties that are involved, it's a little more expensive, but you have a longer warranty. What's in the past? Can anybody explain how that's worked in the past? Has always been
The law says lowest responsible, and certainly the term responsible is vague. It can take on a lot of meanings. I think in this case, you have with an architect who's been through this a lot, they will go through an interview process with each of the bidders, and part of that will be warranties and things like that to get a real true picture, not just cost, but that's a good point. Sometimes
I've seen it where it's lowest cost, but what are you getting really out of it
right
at the end of the day?
And a lot of times, how long will these companies be in business, and how a warranty is only good as the company's long-term functionality. So
the last time Travis was here, I think the last time they replaced this roof was 20 years ago.
I wasn't here yet, but yeah, it was
1999, I guess. But again, it's lasted about 20 years, and it's holding water on top, and it's sagging. And
we had the same thing when I was on the board of management. The 20-year flat roof didn't quite make it to 20. I think it got to about 17, and it needed quite a bit of work. So that's not unusual either. Okay, can we roll call then?
Sure. Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
And 5, we have old business. You can see the A, approve the following policies for second reading. The way this goes is tonight's the second reading, and then the next time it'll be for a vote, correct? Correct. And as you can see, you can read all those about non-discrimination, et cetera, but if anybody has any questions, I'm on that committee, and am on that committee. A lot of the changes are things that we have to do through OSBA urges us to do, either state law has changed and urges us to do it. A lot of times it's just very, very slight changes.
Since we have new board members here, I guess I'll take a second to explain that. We use OSBA for our policy services, and 4 times a year, they do something called the PDQ, the Policy Development Quarterly, and they give us updates. A lot of the updates come right from the state, from the changes to the revised code, which impact policy or even federal law that impacts state practice or state law. So they give us a batch of policies with the highlights or the changes that they recommend, and then 4 times a year, we schedule a policy committee meeting. We go through each policy where we want to make changes, if we want to adopt what they recommend, or if we need to do something specific for us. And then at the board meeting, we'll bring those policy changes to the board and provide copies in your packet of any changes we're making. There are times where maybe we need to review or look at our policies, and they're maybe not being recommended for review by OSBA, but board member or superintendent or treasurer or administrator or teacher, but somebody brings something to our attention that we need to discuss. That would also be pulled and brought to the policy committee, and then any changes would be sent on to the board for the first reading, and then the second reading, and then adoption after that. So that's kind of that process. Okay.
Okay, next page then. Ron?
Yeah, maybe.
John? Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion at all? Okay, roll call then.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Millis?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
And number 6, superintendent's recommendations and report.
Okay, moving on to 6A, superintendent's report. Not much. It's been kind of quiet over the holiday break. A couple of things I just want to make you aware of. You don't think these are going to be issues, but sometimes they can be. There were 2 trees that we had taken out in the high school courtyard. The reason is because those leaves, guess where they fall? Right on top of the roof. They fall on the roof on the first floor. Guess what they call it? The drains. So we needed to address that. Mr. Pugh, our maintenance supervisor, had approached the high school principal and Travis and I about taking those out. So we had those trees taken out because if we're going to eventually replace this group, we don't want to continue to have the same problems with that the water can't get off of there. So it presents a huge maintenance issue for our staff. Also, grass is not growing in the courtyard anymore because there's so much shade. So it's a mud pit, and we do allow kids to go out there at lunchtime, and we need to get some grass planted there this late spring and early summer and get that to take in there a little bit and kind of clean that area up. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Also want to thank the maintenance and custodial crew. We've had some cold temperatures. We just don't leave the buildings completely vacant during the holiday break. They do stop in. BW had filled in for John. John was on vacation, but we had people check the buildings daily because of pipes potentially busting or a boiler goes out and we don't have heat for several days. And with 5-degree temperatures, you could have a water issue there and heating issues.
Some of the homeless schools have done it.
Yeah. So, just want to thank them. Also clearing the grounds. We've had some weather here lately and some snow. They're up. John's calling me at 3:45 in the morning as he's headed in to give me advice about the roads as well before I go out on the roads. But I wanted to acknowledge them for getting the parking lots, the sidewalks taken care of in some pretty cold temperatures. Also the buses, Janice did a great job. When buses sit for a long time in the cold, they don't always start. She spent her weekend over here running them, starting them, trying to keep them charged up, plugged in, so they start. And the one thing you don't want to do is come back from holiday break on a Monday and have 4 or 5 buses that don't start. So they were here on the weekends, putting time in to make sure the buses were ready to go on Monday, which we had a planning day anyway, we had a snow day. So, but they were ready on Tuesday. I do want to give you an update. Obviously, we've been cautious. We've been moving forward with our facilities plan, with our adoption, with getting levy, select how we're going to structure a levy, getting that on the ballot potentially. We have to turn that language in if we're going to proceed. by February 7th. Travis is responsible for turning that into the auditor and Board of Elections. But one thing that we realized when we started this back in August and October was that the property at Carroll Eastern had not been rezoned. It was still rural residential, and we definitely need to know if we have a place to put a school. The good news is that it has made it, that rezoning process, we have made it through regional planning with approval and the recommendation. Last night we had a Greenfield Township Zoning Commission hearing, and we had some discussion about it, some questions that were answered. A couple neighbors close by had a lot of questions, some very good some information to consider or feedback for us. One of the gentlemen called me today to discuss it further. He certainly understands and got his questions answered and is on board now as well. The Zoning Commission did recommend the approval of the rezoning to special use so we can put a school on it to the Greenfield Township trustees. And now my understanding is tomorrow a 10-day notice will go out. They have, by law, they have to do another 10-day notice before the trustees can act. And the trustees ultimately have the final decision. They can do whatever they want. They can, accept the recommendation and approve it, or they can reject it or modify it. But the trustees will now be making their decision. My understanding is possibly on the 24th. Maybe they may not have to have a special meeting on the 25th because they know we're under a timeline to feel comfortable going to the ballot and hopefully passing a bond issue to go to new K-5 elementary, new K-5 elementary, and then having a place to put that as well. So just wanted to give you an update and let you know about the rezoning. Besides that, if there's any questions about those things, we'll go ahead and jump into 6B under students and programs. I want to recognize the Blue Carroll Band student representatives to the 2018 All-County Band Festival held January 10th, which is today. From the middle school, Joe Versma, Kennedy Breen, Max Graham, Kyle Griefey, Bryson Herman, Colin Levesque, Thomas Muncie, Isabel Ripple, Emily Swope, and Josh Wolin. From the high school, Devin Foster, Sam Graham, Kyle Griefey, Chris Hale, Seth Ho, and Sarah Smith.
Motion or any discussion?
Second?
So moved. I'll second. Okay, thank you. Any discussion now? Roll call, please.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Mellis?
Yes.
Okay, under 6C, Personnel and Employment, ask board to approve the substitute teacher list number 6 for January 2018 as submitted by the Fairfield County Educational Service Center. All substitutes in Fairfield County except for Pickerington, I'm not sure about Lancaster, but the county schools use ESE to create a substitute teacher list. We don't have our own list. People register there, they can sub at all the different county schools that they choose to sub at.
There was only one name, wasn't there, this time?
Yeah, in addition, it is very hard. I just want you to know how hard it is to find substitute teachers. You have to have an undergraduate degree. That's the only requirement. And honestly, substitutes are not paid much throughout the county. We all keep it very consistent, so one district doesn't get an advantage over another. But it's very hard. So there's one additional name, but that is being added to the current list that was approved in December, and then the other list that was approved in November, and so on.
I assume the Educational Service Center takes care of all the background checks.
Application, BCI,
Certainly without, yes.
yeah. They don't send them on to they don't get put on the list until all that's done. Where are we? 2, approve the following student teaching field experience students for the 2017-18 school year. 2A, Jared Schmelzer from OUL with Taylor Mavis at Blue Carroll Primary School, effective January 29th, 2018 through April 27th, 2018. 2B, Nicole Oriel from OUL with Lisa Sauer at Blue Carroll Primary School, effective January 29th through April 27th, 2018. And 2C, Rachel King from Ohio University of Lancaster with Toby Craner at the Intermediate School, effective January 16th through May 4th, 2018. C3, approve Heidi Gilliland from Indiana State University for 45 hours of nursing clinical experience with Nicole Bigham effective January 28th through effective January 2018 through April 2018, pending receipt of background checks. Receipt 4, approve the following athletic supplemental contracts for the 17-18 school year as presented. This is Kevin Miller, 8th grade football assistant. Just a little bit of background if you're wondering why we're just now doing this. Chad has a process to track all his coaches and recommendations. He sends that to Jennifer, our administrative assistant, to put on the agenda. Jennifer also has a spreadsheet. Chad had this gentleman, all his paperwork had been turned in. He had met every requirement. He was on Chad's list. Again, he had his people activities, concussion, certificate training, everything he needed, but his name did not get sent to Jennifer. It was left off. It was the only one. It was just it was a mistake that was made. And in order to pay him, we have to approve him. But everything was turned in, and because of the authorizations you give, if you approve that, it goes back to the effective date that he was offered the job and he accepted the job. Okay? And then C5, approve the following volunteers for the 17-18 school year, pending successful background check results, and that would be the Group A volunteers with background checks on file. And then from the addendum, under personnel and employment, approve the employment of Cynthia Freeman as a substitute administrator for the 17-18 school year on an as-needed basis to be paid at the long-term substitute daily rate, which so it's $135 a day is what long-term substitutes are paid. The reason why I'm making this recommendation is I can't go into too many specifics, but we have a administrator whose spouse is going through some health issues right now, and that administrator has been out the entire week, and we're not exactly sure, due to her husband's health, exactly when, how much she'll miss and how sporadically, but I don't like having our primary or intermediate school without an administrator for several days. Mr. Little is approved on supplemental as an assistant principal, but I want to clarify that's a 1/9 position of his day. And if I assign him for an entire week to one building, potentially he's not able to then all day get his athletic responsibilities done. So I can use him sporadically for coverage, but if I need somebody for 3 or 4 days in a row, I would like to be able to rely on Mrs. Freeman, who worked for the district for over 30 years as a teacher and administrator, knows our students, knows our families, understands the policies of the district. And if there's times that I need to use her, I would like to be able to call her and say, I need you for a couple of days. So that's why we added that addendum in request. So are there any questions about any of those?
I have some questions.
Okay.
The questions I have, I think I ask about every year, but I'll just go ahead and ask again. On the ones with OUL, do we have some kind of an agreement with OUL as far as, does the district get any kind of classes?
Travis can answer this. We do, but they cannot personally accept those teachers that are working with,
They can't personally do
teachers.
it.
They can't personally
I meant the
accept.
district, but the district.
We get a stipend that the district has to take in, and then we will allocate it to their classroom budget
Okay.
for doing that. They personally can't receive even the free tuition. They couldn't receive that either. Yeah.
Okay, what about Indiana State? Since they're so far away, are we going to benefit in any way from that?
Well,
Just curious. Because I haven't seen one of these before.
typically not. This is a community member.
I figured it probably was.
And she is doing a program through Indiana State University. She does have children in the district. She's working on her clinicals. But, you know, she's in a program that basically, you know, an online program.
Oh, okay.
Indiana State isn't one we typically have an agreement with, but we could certainly accommodate this request.
Well, it's not a hardship for the district. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just had a question, just wondering.
Yeah.
I know in Franklin County, where I taught for 500 years, the district got free classes that we applied for, and either we got them or didn't get them.
And I think the ethics commission kind of shut that
down
years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got my plus 30 that way. So.
Yeah. Any other discussion on any of these items?
A second.
We'll have to get used to their voices, I'm not sure which one was either. Roll call.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
And Mr. Millis?
Yes.
Okay, D, contract and agreement, approve an agreement with OSBA for Ohio Policy Services Client Website Update effective January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2018. That's our online policy manual that we have to keep it updated. And then D2, approve a joint agreement appointing the Business Advisory Council of the Fairfield County Educational Service Center to serve as a business advisory council for the school district. This is a new legal requirement, part of House Bill 49. All the smaller county schools are working with the ESC to establish a business advisory council representative of the entire county and even beyond. We are working on our policy. We have to enter into agreement, but we will also later in the meeting here have the policy to approve as well. So we had to make some updates to that. Any questions about those two items?
Motion?
Second.
Brad. Roll call.
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Millis?
Yes.
Okay, nothing under E, nothing under personnel and resignations or retirements at this time. And Mark, back to you.
Number 7, new business. A, approve the following policy on one reading. CFA Business Advisory Council Board, again, it's something that the state is requiring now, but they're going in with ESC because there are, each district has only maybe so many businesses in it that it could probably call on, and then even fewer that would be interested in doing it, so that's why we're in a large group. And B is approve a resolution in compliance with section 5705.21A of the Ohio Revised Code and determine to proceed with bond issue and tax levy. Anyone like to make a motion? I'll go ahead and make that motion.
I'll second.
Just real quick on the, just so we're all on the same page on the resolution to proceed. When we did the resolution of necessity in December, then I filed this with both the Board of Election, or not the Board of Elections, the County Auditor, Ohio Department of Education, Ohio Department of Taxation. They are the ones that set the millage. If you look at page 51 and 52, on the electronic copy, on the hard copy, it should be the third page in. That is truly what you will see on the ballot when you go in to pull the lever or to push the button. It's got exactly what's being built, the $30 million bond issue, the 37 years. The millage came back at 4.3 mils for the bond issue, which is pretty much what we thought. I hate the way they put the language in here on how much it costs. It's confusing. It's basically 43 cents times $1,000 to get it to the $100,000 value, but that's $430. But you're not paying the $430. You're paying 35% of that, which is what the houses are assessed on. So for the bond issue, it looks like it's $430 a year, but it's $150.50 a year. Same as the PI levy, which is we had set at 1.2 mils. Which the auditor certifies at approximately $446,000 of revenue a year, which would go into that permanent improvement line item.
And it remains at 1.2.
And it remains at 1. It will be rolled back from 1.2, so it only raises $446 approximately per year for the district. But again, it's 12 cents times 1,000, $120, 35% of that. It's $42 per.
So with the deadline being February 7th, that you have to send things in, is there any reason for it? I'm not asking for one, by the way. Is there any reason that we might have to have a special board meeting? Do you see any?
No, if this is approved, the board has performed all of the steps to be on the ballot. I have to meet a couple more deadlines. I will go ahead and file this with the auditor, Department of Education, Department of Taxation. That doesn't get us on the ballot yet, but if it goes to the Board of Elections, which has to occur by February 7th, we will officially be on the ballot.
If we run into a major issue that third week of zoning, then we'll need to have a special meeting and we need
Okay.
to talk about what
Yeah.
we want.
Right,
Consider, but
I just thought of that, since.
right now, we're okay right now.
Yeah.
Travis, our regular
To
meeting
be
is at
clear with that
12.
language right now,
Mhm.
just so, I mean, this is a number we're all gonna need to know, just out being out in the community limits, how much it's gonna cost taxpayers.
The good news is that obviously it's 5.5 mils. I mean, the 4.3 was about, I don't know, a tenth lower than what we thought, maybe 4.4, 4.5. So it was good that property valuations was able to keep the mills down. 4.3 plus 1.2 is the 5.5.
It's
Travis
$100,
has-
it's $192.50, and I have to certify it per $100,000 evaluation.
Right, so-
I know people get squeamish, there's no, when they say, well, I live in a house, it's more expensive, $100,000, but it's just per $100,000 of value, it's $192.50. So you can kind of do the math from there based on what your house is valued by the auditor.
Travis and Sean, can answer this. So to do this in one reading, do we need a motion to approve? To be able to do this in one reading?
I'm sorry, the business advisory council policy or the?
Right, approve the business advisory council.
We had delayed the whole business advisory thing before, because there was a question.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we needed to go back and work with the ESC and revise our language to our policy, which I have submitted to all of you. There was a request to ensure that our policy, stress the importance of attracting female business owners and other minorities to that. This will be part of this motion under 7, which also includes, somebody could ask for a voting line underneath 7A1 just for the advisory board policy to be approved, but there's also no issue with moving on to B. And if you guys are prepared to,
I have no issue with it. Basically, I'm looking at it as far as approving it. And, when I was involved with other things, we had to approve being able to okay it in one reading. This is not.
Oh, I see.
I mean, we can go and approve.
Yes.
Item on an agenda with one reading.
Yes.
Yes.
The 3 readings is more of a courtesy.
It's more.
Yeah.
Time, thoughtfulness towards the actual policy itself. Some districts will do them on one. Some districts just do them on 2. And I think I've seen 3 as well, so.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
But if something does come up in the future where, you can see where
Well-
you're gonna be voting no on one and yes on another, and it really needs to have another voting line. We
Yeah.
certainly did that quite a bit with
Joe-
another board member,
Joe's question.
and they're not here tonight.
Joe's question brings up a good point. There is a filing deadline for the business advisory, policy that we have to adopt, and it's March 1st. So if we start now, we have to have it submitted. The ESC will actually do this for us, but we have to approve our agreement with them, which we did up above, and now we have to actually approve the policy. So if we drag this out to 3, I'm not gonna be able to get our policy and everything to the ESC, and they want to basically file before March 1st. Sure. With ODE. Any questions about I don't know if Travis has any more information about the bond issue from improvement levy?
Unless there's any questions.
You guys have all been attending the previous board meetings and.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, we were here.
Yeah.
Bratton and Noel.
I'm sorry?
Is there any other discussion?
Oh,
It was Bratton and Noel.
Bratton with the motion, and
I think that's
It
what
was,
it
it was Mark, it was Mark.
Was it Mark? Okay, it was
Yeah,
Mark,
Mark
sorry.
and Brett.
Gotcha.
I'd be second banana, it's not a Mark.
okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, roll call then, please.
Mr. Mellis,
Yes.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Parker.
Yes.
Board reports and information, all those exciting committees that you signed up for, we can draw the line through transportation, and number 5, and number 3. I think everybody knows which one they're on now.
Transportation.
Goes, number 3 goes entirely, and number 5 goes entirely, and we add finance, insurance. Bratton and Johnson.
we've got the policy, but we need to draw like the curriculum instruction, co-curricular.
Right. 3 and 5 with the transportation, 3 and 5 go in their entire.
You good there?
Since Judy's here all the time, she can let us know if something comes up.
In regard to policy, when do you anticipate like the first?
We will get another one.
February. February, I
In
think.
February, so towards the end of February, I'll be emailing you guys and we'll probably have to have a meeting, probably late February.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have the upcoming PTO booster and board meeting, which always seem to change, so don't be surprised. So are any of those needing to be changed that you're aware of?
Just to draw attention to the 22nd, to the Student of the Month reception. Student of the Months from each building will be here in the cafeteria at 5:30. Some board members have attended in the past when they could make it. Others have work conflicts or family conflicts and they can't get here at 5:30. But if you're welcome to be here, we'll have some cake and punch and the families come in and the principals say something nice and recognize the Students of the Month from the fall. And then we do that again in May.
Are you gonna do it prior to board meeting, like we usually do? or-
Yeah, and it'll be at 5:30, in the cafeteria, and then our board meeting will follow at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, usually it's prior to board meeting, so. Just come in a little earlier to, not get your picture taken this time unless unless you're on the shoulder or someone you nominate.
So I think